Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the long-delayed Groovy podcast. We're finally back. My name is Ken Kousen. I'm podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and I'm joined by
Graeme Rocher. I am broadcasting from Donostia, San Sebastian in Spain.
Wonderful. Anybody who is or is at all familiar with Groovy and its general ecosystem, Grails, Micronaut, and so on, is definitely familiar with Graeme. Graeme is the creator, basically, of both the Grails framework and the Micronaut framework, along with others. But he was there at the beginning, and he was heavily involved in the Groovy framework as well, the Groovy language, right at the beginning as well. I'm just always happy to get a chance to talk to him. Welcome. Thank you for coming, Graeme.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
So you're that's in the south of Spain, is that right? Down in that area?
No, exactly the opposite, the north.
Oh, the north. Okay. Oh, that's right. You did tell me that.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
have to open Google Maps later and see
Yeah. More or less, France is half an hour drive from here.
Oh, okay. For the people who are listening, I should just mention that the show notes for this episode are available in a GitHub repository. I'll add that link to the description when we upload this to the YouTube channel. But if you're just listening to this, we're at github.com/groovy-podcast. And that's the organization. And then the specific archive is Groovy Podcast, all one word. This is episode technically 89, believe it or not, and I just arbitrarily called it season 7, episode 1, because it's been a long time since our last podcast. Okay. Oh, and we may wind up being joined a little bit later by Jen Weise, I think she's pronounced it, who will be in the OCI offices in St. Louis, Missouri. So hopefully she'll get a chance to join us. So let's we'll go through the releases and the blog posts and everything, but I want to call attention to the fact that I think it was last month was the 15-year anniversary of the first release of Grails, or
the 1.0 release.
The 1.0 release. I mean, that's funny because the Spring people have been making a big deal out of the fact that I think Spring 1.0 came out in, I don't know,
it was 19 years ago or something.
Right.
Nearly 20, yeah.
So you were there at the beginning when Grails was first formulated. And again, for those who don't know, the very first edition of, the definitive guide to Grails, or actually, what was the first Grails book called when you wrote it?
The definitive guide to Grails.
It was a definitive guide, because I know that there were some name changes along the way. At any rate, that was Graeme who wrote that book, and I loved that book. That was great. My first Grails book was back when Grails was in 0.4, that book that was written on InfoQ and everything.
Yeah.
Like Getting Started with Grails or something. That was just the bare minimum, whereas your book was fun. So what was it like at the very beginning? What triggered it all? What made you decide you wanted to be involved in all this and so on?
Yeah, well, I was working for an e-learning company, and we built e-learning content and also like learning management systems that were mainly written in Java, Spring, Hibernate kind of thing. And I first discovered Groovy and actually got involved in the Groovy community like quite a bit sooner than Grails. Because I wrote some code generation software, and you'll see that code generation is a theme of Grails as well, I guess. But I wrote some code generation software that would take a Word document, and using a Groovy script, it turned it into a e-learning course directly from the Word document. So like authors would write the Word document and press the button, and that build an e-learning course. And it used Apache POI, I think it was, or something like that, to convert the Word document into like XML and transform it to XSLT and all sorts of things. So templates.
Wow. It was a lot of fun. It's been a while since I've seen XSLT transformations.
Right. So it was, but Groovy was a big important part of that. I think I used all sorts of things from Groovy, from the ad builder, and to automate a lot of the generation and whatever else. And at the same time, I had a boss at the time who I'm very thankful for as an influence to me. He was at the time a committer on Apache Cocoon, and he wrote a book about Apache Cocoon, which is an open source framework back in the day. So it was he encouraged me a lot to get into open source. And I was looking around, we had this particular problem at the time at work where it was like really tough and time consuming to customize these learning and management systems that were written in Java and Spring and Hibernate for each customer. There was like a lot of work you had to do, and took a really long time. And we were all jealous of Ruby on Rails, clearly,
Right.
how much faster it was. And I thought, well, why couldn't we just do the same thing but with Groovy? And there was some interest in it on the Groovy mailing list. So we just started an open source project called Rails to try and make ourselves more productive with Spring, Hibernate, and Java. And it happened to be that project resonated with a lot of people and solved a lot of people's pain. So it really took off.
I heard a story back then, and maybe I'll ask you if it's true, because I don't know if it's true. It was the story I was told. What the story I heard, and by the way, welcome, Jen. Glad you're able to make it.
Hello, thanks.
Yes. Hey, Jen.
Hi.
So Jen is here are you in the OCI offices? I kind of said you were, but I was guessing.
Sometimes, yes, today I am home, but sometimes I am.
Very good, very good. But you're still, that's nominally what you're considered part of.
Previously, yes, for the last like 13 and a half, almost 14 years, but I did just transition over with the Grails and Micronaut Foundations to Unity officially.
I didn't realize that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I trust that's a happy change for you. That's something you were looking forward to.
Yes, absolutely. So I was following the foundations and following the technology. So excited about that.
Great. Okay, well, we'll get to that a bit later. In case you didn't realize that when you joined, I was talking to Graeme about the origins of the Grails framework, how everything was created in the beginning there 15 years ago.
Yeah.
No, the story I was going to mention, Graeme, was that rumor had it that the original name of the framework was actually going to be Groovy on Rails, just like Ruby on Rails, and that no less a person than DHH himself, David Hanemeyer Hansen, said, no, you can't call it Rails because that's my framework. You can't do that. And therefore, somebody made the decision to shorten it to just Grails and went with it. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we had an email from David at one point asking us to cease and desist from using the on Rails suffix. So yeah, it was Groovy on Rails, and then we thought, okay, fine, we'll just drop the on Rails bit and go with the kind of chalice cups theme,
right?
And that worked out fine. So I mean, there's no hiding the fact that ultimately, Ruby on Rails was a big inspiration to a lot of frameworks and technologies back there, and it just so happened that for us it was like a non-starter for most of the projects I worked on, which were Java based. So it was cool and challenging building something that provided the same level of productivity and development experience as Ruby on Rails, and I think we succeeded, in achieving that goal of making something simple and easy to use for developers that was fun and productive to use. and that's why it was that's why it achieved such early success. You mentioned like 0.3 or 0.4 when books were being written about it. So that's I think my book was based on 0.4 or something, if I remember. Yeah, I mean, great technology and a lot of fun to work on, and a fantastic community.
I mean, I remember when Ruby on Rails came out, and I used to compare it when I was talking to students to like the Java dinosaurs being hit by this asteroid from out, that kind of wiped out the ecosystem. Suddenly everything was quick and easy. The problem is, as we know from DHH since then, it's a very, very opinionated framework. You have to do things the way they want you to do them. And of course, everything has to be done in Ruby. So
yeah,
for some people, that was fine. If it was all greenfield development, then okay, you could deal with that. But Ruby wasn't even compiled. It was an interpreted language, and there were always going to be some performance issues associated with that. And there were most companies that we knew about had some investment in Java. So you needed to do something. I tried to learn Ruby on Rails in the early days, and it didn't really take. I think I could understand it much better now, but at that stage in my own learning, it was a big hurdle to pick that up. But when Grails came out, it was based on Spring and Hibernate, and both were established, very successful open source projects in the Java ecosystem. And I thought, oh, great. And just combined it with the Groovy DSLs, you really had something hot. And that I thought that was wonderful. I had a great time with it. I really enjoyed the first edition of your book. I think I still have my signed copy somewhere
that's
in
great.
there. And then eventually, as I recall, you and about a dozen, no, maybe fewer than a dozen, several other guys put together the G21 company. Is that right?
Yeah, that was back in 2008, I think.
Right.
We weren't that many. We were 3 founders. Our peak was 7 employees, I believe. And the company was only in existence for a year.
Right. And then you got bought by, was it
We
VMware?
were Spring Source at the time. So
right, Spring Source before they got bought by VMware.
The Spring Framework company, yeah.
Which made perfect sense at the time, since Grails was so dependent on Spring in those days. And then of course Spring Framework got bought by VMware, which that was the acquisition that always seemed weird to me. I didn't understand why a container company wanted the Spring Framework, but okay, so be it.
Well, they ended up buying them twice, so they must have really wanted them.
Turned out. Then they split off Pivotal, right?
Yeah, and they bought them again.
Exactly. So from what Jeff Brown told me, during those early years, all that basically changed for him is his email address changed like 4 times in 2 years, something like that.
Yeah, there was a lot of change. I think that acquisition happened a bit early. VMware at the time, from my experience with what happened there, VMware at the time were, primarily operated by former Microsoft executives who understood selling software like in a kind of productized way, where you pay $70 for this box software and you keep paying each year and that kind of stuff. But they had no idea about open source business models, or how they work, or what the benefit of them are. So they had suddenly this Spring Source, which was a 300, I think it was about a 300 person organization, and they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to sell it. They didn't know how to push it forward, and yeah, they weren't really an open source company at the time. So I think that changed. Now they are, you know,
much better. Yeah.
And but you know, and even companies like Microsoft have changed. You know,
Right.
so
Yeah, who would have figured that, right? I mean, suddenly they emerge out of the ashes again. And I mean, Azure made such a huge difference for them. And then of course now these days with ChatGPT and OpenAI and everything making a huge difference. Let me, not spend the whole time talking about history, I suppose, although the next major thing I do want to bring up was when you and a few others decided to create Micronaut at that time. So when did that happen? What triggered that? As I recall, it was some frustration with with wanting to do some major refactoring to Grails and deciding to leave Grails without those huge changes and instead do everything over from scratch again.
Yeah, so we felt that, you know, we had a lot of different users coming to us saying, you know, with this is taking this application is taking a lot of memory, or this application is taking too long to start, or this application. And you know, we optimized as much as we could, but ultimately we were hitting some limits of the architecture. And with Grails, we had also like gone on a bit of a journey where at the beginning, Grails was like fully runtime based. So everything was configured and dynamic at runtime. And as each release progressed, we moved more and more into the Groovy compiler until it was more and more compilation time based with AST transformations. And that revealed, like, to me, that you could do a lot more during the compilation phase of the application to optimize it for execution so that it's more efficient, it's more, and at the same time, you know, there was interest in lighter weight microservices, serverless workloads. And, you know, I like Grails, but I don't think it's, you know, you're never going to run Grails inside of a Lambda on on AWS or so we wanted to come up with something that was like really small and efficient, and during the whole development of Grails as well, building on Spring and Hibernate, I got to know the internals of both of those frameworks quite intimately and understand their deficiencies, if you want to put it that way. And well, let's call them compromises, right?
Right.
I don't want to be too controversial, but let's call them compromises, right? So with Micronaut, we make a different set of compromises, right? So no framework is perfect, right? Spring makes this compromise that, okay, we're going to configure your application at runtime using runtime analysis, using reflection, etc., and delay everything until the application is running. And that's easier because it's you know, the reflection API is already there. But then you have all this runtime analysis happening, right? So that has to be delayed until the application is running. So you have to traverse all the annotations on all is wired together, and you have to do that all at runtime. With Micronaut, we chose a different set of compromises, which is, okay, we're going to slow down slightly your compilation, pay a small cost during the compilation process, but then at runtime, it's already ready to roll, right? So that gives us significantly faster startup time, smaller footprint. We don't need as much infrastructure at runtime. That, you know, you can build a Micronaut application that's really small, and that allows Micronaut to go places that are maybe would be challenging, whether it be deploying to an IoT device or serverless or whatever, right? And that's a compromise that a lot of people like, right?
I think that was that corresponded to a lot of the rise of microservices as an architecture back when Grails was, had its big heyday. Then tools like Spring and Spring Boot made monoliths These days, I hear the term modulus thrown around a lot, but there was a transition definitely in the industry away from monolith type applications to these microservices. And my understanding was Micronaut was designed with those in mind.
Yeah, well, I think there was two trends, and they're often conflated. So I think microservices was definitely one trend, and Micronaut clearly caters to that trend. But there was also a bigger trend, even if you're not running a cluster of microservices, which was moving from fat servers to fat clients. So, we saw it, the first versions when Grails came out, it was like we had GSP and all the server-side rendering and,
right.
et cetera, and, we saw the rise of fat clients, whether it be an iOS client, an Android client,
right,
or a React or Vue or whatever front end, right? And therefore, a lot of the responsibility was moved from the server, and the server became stateless, REST based, right? So even if you're not a microservice, right, you're shifting to a completely different architecture, right? Whilst Grails is, had historically been more optimized for, generating Chrome views and all server-side view rendering. And we did with Grails, we did do some integration with JavaScript frameworks as well. But I think in general, the original design was at the time when we had these like large servers. So yeah, there was lots of different trends that drove simplification on the server side, and then also things like different server-side deployment architectures. So you have things like gRPC and GraphQL and REST, and Micronaut caters to all of those different use cases, right? You can write a gRPC app, you can write a GraphQL application, you can write a REST application, and we also do support server-side view rendering, but it's a very adaptable framework. And Micronaut and Grails are not really comparable in that Grails is really a web framework, right?
Right.
And Micronaut is a much more general purpose. So that you have folks that are using it in all sorts of scenarios, from command line applications to even like there's folks using it in JavaFX and desktop applications and microservices, message-driven microservices. The different deployment scenarios in Micronaut are much wider.
There were a couple of things in Micronaut that jumped out at me during the history. I haven't spent as much time with it as I'd like. I've still got my Micronaut T-shirt that I think
I
gave
can see
me
that
years ago. Yeah. But that was the first time I heard the term ahead of time compilation, AOT. That was quite different. I thought it seemed like time travel. Like, how could you even do that? And yet it was the first crack in the facade of Spring, of everything being dynamic at runtime. And the other thing that was dazzling was I thought Micronaut was the first framework that had an app that ran on the Graal virtual machine in like not just under 100 milliseconds. I think you had a demo that went like under 20 milliseconds. The startup time was just you hit the return key and it was running. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah, well, it was interesting that we started work on Micronaut, and at the same time, at Oracle Labs, the GraalVM team were working on GraalVM, and we were doing this development work in parallel. But I had no idea of the existence of GraalVM, but we had arrived at the same conclusions, right? Which was like, you can create much more intelligent compilers, and then these smaller, much more efficient runtimes, right? That we just went about it different ways, right? So they focused on the core AOT native compilation technology, and we focused on optimizing the Java compilation. And that's why they work really well together, because the way GraalVM native image works is it needs to know all the reachable parts of your application. So it needs to know everything about your application. And so it does what's called a closed world static analysis of your application. So that means if your application has nothing dynamic at runtime, no reflection, no dynamic class loading, then it's very easy for GraalVM to perform that analysis. And during the development of Micronaut, we had eliminated all of those dynamic parts. So there's no dynamic class loading, no reflection, no. So it was just very easy for GraalVM for Micronaut to work with GraalVM native image and to build native executables for Micronaut applications with GraalVM, and that's the case today. And it keeps getting better technology. So we expect those numbers to become smaller over time as well. So you mentioned 20. I think the next release will probably be even less, and things will get smaller and more efficient. And we keep investing in new areas to make the closed world static analysis better and the applications more efficient. So for example, we just released recently Micronaut serialization, which lets you serialize and deserialize JSON in a completely reflection-free manner. Basically eliminating one of the dependencies we had, which was on Jackson.
Which Spring, by the way, Spring of course still uses that. That's their default.
Right, and of course we still support Jackson because a lot of people love Jackson, but that's fine. You can still, but now we have a solution that out of the box. And you can create very small efficient applications with Micronaut and very easily compile them into the native executables that run and exhibit those behaviors that dropping the startup time to low milliseconds and memory consumption as well, which and the exciting thing about that is the possibilities it opens, because now you can take Java to places it couldn't go before, right? So right. A lot of people always say, why would I do this? I don't care about throwing like a gigabyte of memory at my container. Who cares, right? It's just memory. But you can run the application in deployment scenarios that just weren't technically possible before. On Raspberry Pi or on serverless instances that only take 120 megabyte. Yeah. So there's massive efficiencies to be had.
I remember, the Spring Framework people, when they created Spring Boot, there was always the comparison between Spring Boot and Micronaut, and of course Quarkus was another competitor, which we'll get to in a minute. But the latest version of Spring Boot 3 dot whatever, their big innovation with Spring 6 and Spring Boot 3 was simply that they moved the minimum required JDK up to JDK 17. And not much else changed in Spring. There are some changes, but not that much in the actual visible API that users code to. And in order, I think, to compensate for that lack of new features, they do these demos where they show, but now you could take a Spring Boot app and run it through the Graal native compiler and thereby get these amazing startup times and small memory footprints, even though the application's like 3 times the size that it was before. And I keep thinking, isn't anybody going to mention that Micronaut did this 5 years ago, 7 years ago? It's like, I'm glad they're doing it. That's great. It's about time. But Micronaut was there years ago.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting to see how Spring has evolved, and it's become more and more Micronaut-like. With Spring Boot 3, and moving more and more into the compiler, removing more and more dynamicity, I guess if you want to use it. Whatever. But that's what competitive pressure does. The thing is, they have some fundamental constraints that mean they will never likely to be able to match the numbers that we were able to get to in terms of startup time and memory consumption. And probably that's fine. Maybe Spring users maybe don't care. I mean, the fact is that the fact of the matter is as well. I mean, Spring is huge. It's very popular, and they have a huge community. So that they don't really have much to worry about. I think the exciting thing for developers is that there's choices now. There's viable alternatives in the Java community, right? Which would be a very sad place, the Java community, if all you had was Spring, right?
Well, that's very diplomatic as always. I remember, and by the way, Jen, I promise we will get to you. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're fine. I'm
Okay.
happy to be here. No worries.
Okay. I was with Graeme at a Java 1 conference, I don't know, pre-pandemic. So a couple of years before that, when you first mentioned the word Quarkus to me, I'd never heard it. I didn't know that. Red Hat had announced their framework, and I think they had a big presentation at Java 1 about it. And the response I had at the time, now again, I don't mind being controversial because I just figured, hey, nobody's listening anyway. Sorry, whatever. I go ahead and say this. The same response I have now whenever anybody mentions Quarkus is, in a world where we already have Micronaut, why do we need Quarkus? I don't, is there anything that Quarkus does that Micronaut doesn't? I mean, is there any reason to use that versus Micronaut? I don't think I know of any.
Yeah, so the development of Quarkus was clearly, I think the first commit was like a month after Micronaut was open sourced, so you make your own conclusions from that.
Yeah,
but,
I was like, why did they even bother? I mean, did they just? I hope they didn't just take the code and go with it.
No,
I mean, but
no, it's very different architecturally. Again, it makes a different set of compromises, right? So they've focused heavily on using a particular feature of GraalVM native image, which is called build time initialization, where they try to initialize as much as possible at build time. And this does mean that they, with Quarkus, you probably get the best startup numbers, better than Micronaut. We're talking like milliseconds, 2 or 3 milliseconds better. But it is a very challenging set of compromises for them that I'm not sure how they're going to maintain long term, because they basically, you need to build and maintain integrations to be able to build time initialize all third-party libraries, because initializing types and build time with native image actually changes the behavior of the application. It's not the same, and that is actually one area where the Spring team and the Micronaut team are on the same page, that we definitely do not want to use and abuse build time initialization, because it leads to very difficult to debug problems with native image. But all the best of luck to the Quarkus guys in trying to maintain that long term, because I wouldn't want to. Yeah, and I mean, in terms of why they built it, again, to cater for Red Hat audience, which is, Red Hat has always been about pushing the Jakarta and Java, historically the Java EE standards, so JAX-RS and so forth. They implemented something that was familiar to users who are familiar with those standards, right?
Okay.
So if those are really important, whilst Micronaut, we've tried to build something that's familiar and easy to migrate to from Spring. So if you are a Spring user, you'll feel pretty much at home. And I think it's a much easier thing to move to and understand and learn. So I think they had a different set of requirements, and anyway, this kind of competition is good for the whole ecosystem, and certainly good for GraalVM, that all these different frameworks are investing and making the technology better, and so forth.
I'm sure it's all good for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
A couple of things, again, small stuff, and then we'll talk about a couple of the links and news items. But I mean, the fact I got you here, I want to take advantage of the fact that you've been through all these different big events in the community's history. When VMware / Pivotal / Spring Source, whoever they were at the time, decided that they didn't want to be involved in Groovy or Grails anymore, Groovy, of course, eventually wound up at Apache, at the Apache Software Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But Grails wound up at OCI. And I assume you were there, Jen, at the time, right? I mean, you said you were there 14, 15 years. So you were at OCI. So now I know Jeff Brown worked at OCI for a number of years, but what was that like, the transition from the company of the size of well, VMware and everybody there, moving to OCI? How was that for the Groovy and the Grails people there?
I think
What was it like for you?
Jen,
I'll just say that.
Jen can answer. You want to say that? Start, and then I'll pitch in.
Well, I mean, as far as OCI goes, we were really excited to welcome the framework to the organization, and it brought a new practice for us to focus on and be able to support clients and getting to be a part of that community, and all of that was really exciting. And watching that grow over the last several years while it had been a part of object computing, was just really exciting to see. Object computing started out as an open source company, and so we really embrace that at our core. And so to be able to have a technology like Grails come on board, and then watch the growth, and then watch Micronaut as well come from that. It was just a really exciting to see, and we were very proud of that, and proud of the team. And really anytime that we can support open source technologies that really do change the world in whatever way that they're being used, is great. And then I'm sure Graeme has his view as well, because we were excited to welcome Graeme, and watch, like I said, watch that team grow. So that was a neat thing to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Object computing is a great home for the technologies. They understand open source and what it means to support an open source community. And we looked at several different options for Grails when we left, and object computing were the ones that convinced us, and they have done a great job in shepherding the technology and also investing in new ideas in the space like Micronaut. And also letting it grow, outside in organizations, around the world, and collaborating with, now, I'm working at Oracle Labs, but we continue to collaborate together with object computing on a daily basis, and it's through the foundation. And it's fantastic to jointly work on these technologies and watch them grow.
Well, certainly from the perspective of an outsider, I have to say that OCI has been an excellent steward for both technologies. I mean,
Absolutely.
impressed. That's, I guess, brought me to my other question, which was the big move that surprised the heck out of me was when you decided to go to Oracle. What attracted you to that, or was it Jeff playing the wrong music in the office or something like that finally drove you?
I think I've ridden in the car with both of them to and from events and airports, and I did find out that they have a very similar taste in music, right?
We do have a very similar taste in music, so it's definitely wasn't Jeff's music. No, Oracle approached me several times and I said no several times. Over a course of about a year. But in the end, I saw an opportunity for more investment into by Micronaut becoming a multi-vendor. In that we could basically have a much larger team, which we do. And at Oracle Labs, we have around about 15 people working on Micronaut on a daily basis in different areas. And it's resulted in major features being built from both companies, so Micronaut data, for example, Micronaut serialization, a lot of the test resources, the Gradle and Maven plugins. We've been able to have a much larger team investing in, and Oracle is very keen to see Micronaut grow, and usage of Micronaut is growing internally at Oracle. We have a lot of teams at Oracle using Micronaut. So it's great to see it flourish within Oracle as well. And Oracle recently became an engineering partner to the foundation. So we want to see that collaboration continue, and it's only going to be beneficial for the technology long term. So and in terms of me, I also looked at the other side, which was at Oracle, the GraalVM team are here, the Java team are here, and like I said, I'm working with some people who are way smarter than me, who on the compiler side, and which is beneficial to Micronaut because we have both the Java compiler team and the GraalVM compiler team and the Java runtime team, which means if there's anything that needs optimizing or solving any layer of the stack, it's easier for me to reach out and make things better.
I could see that would be a real asset.
So and that's only good for Micronaut, right? And the foundation.
So we've mentioned the foundations. Well, I say foundations plural because there's the Grails one and a Micronaut one, but we haven't actually said what they are, what they do. Can you give us a summary, Jen, of what that's all about?
Sure. So the foundations are, and I mentioned, like you just said, we have the Grails Foundation and Micronaut Foundation, and they're not-for-profit organizations. And we established these to specifically focus efforts on, evangelizing and promoting the framework, helping support the ecosystem of the functionality, and making sure that we are continuing the technical innovation and advancement of the framework. So while yes, the technology itself had made its move to object computing, and it was supported, but it was just a practice there. So while we're doing all of that work, having something that was dedicated to the specific technology was exciting and needed, right? So you want something that is wholly focused on that, especially with as of a few years ago, right? Especially to focus on a new technology like Micronaut. So you want something there to support that. And then, being able to have a technology advisory board, which is made up, as you know, Ken, because you're part of the Grails technology advisory board. But to have that technology advisory board full of folks that are not just from OCI or Oracle or they're from all different organizations that can contribute and provide feedback and help guide where the technology can go. So that kind of stuff is really helpful. I think it's good to have that in place to get various perspectives from the different types of industries that we have that are using the frameworks, and also the folks might come from different organizations that use it, or if they might just use it personally as well. But just getting that sort of contribution from them, I think is invaluable.
Well, both foundations announced this partnership with something called the Unity Foundation. I know the word unity in one context, but what's this about?
So it is a St. Louis-based foundation. Dr. Mashiri was really wanting to find a way to continue to serve the community, especially using open source technology to help community underserved, just bringing everyone together, all parts together to collaborate, and be able to partner with organizations that might need the use of open source software to help them and to help people. And so there was that mission, and the greater scope of that, right, is to bring in these amazing open source technologies to help build architecture for organizations to serve them better. So hence the move of these technologies and the foundations to Unity's non-for-profit entity. And so we can just more closely align and more closely build things to help folks.
Okay, well, thank you. I really do wish you the best there. I had no idea that you made that move. So
I'm still in the same office.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm still, I have a new email. But this is helps allow just a little more focus in the areas. So we're excited to see what comes with the future, and to have that additional collaboration with folks. So.
And Graeme mentioned that Oracle's an engineering partner as well. So that's got to help.
Yeah.
Okay, Graeme, I got to ask you a technical question anyway. One of the things that Spring did, because I got to say, I mean, I teach technical training classes, and a lot of my demand, a lot of the demand that I do is Spring related. The move to Spring Boot 3 and Spring 6 required a jump to Java 17. Now, that's a bold move, because while Java 17 is growing in adoption, I don't even know if I think they're out of single digits now, but I doubt they've broken 20%. I mean, I haven't seen any statistics lately. Are you familiar with any numbers? But I mean, I guess what I really want to ask is what the plans are for Micronaut and or Grails, if you happen to know. What are they gonna move the minimum JDK up to 11? Are they going to go to 17, or do they care about non-LTS releases, all that kind of stuff? Because I mean, 20 had nothing in it. I mean, that wasn't preview,
right. So in the case of Micronaut, we will be making the same jump in Micronaut 4.
To 17.
Yes. We will have to keep supporting Micronaut 3 for a long time.
Right.
And we'll continue to do so, because that is the Java 8 plus version of Micronaut. So we don't anticipate abandoning that branch, if you want to call it that. But Micronaut 4 will be a Java 17 baseline as well. And Micronaut 4 is also an opportunity for us to obviously clean up, modularize further, lead the shift to the Jakarta namespace from JavaX,
Right.
and which was, which we still have some remnants of in Micronaut 3. Update all of our dependencies to new major versions, so things like 5.86 and so forth. And it's kind of a little bit inevitable for us because even if we wanted to stay on an earlier version of Java, Micronaut 4, it's less and less technically feasible as our third-party dependencies drop support for.
Right.
So we have transitive dependencies on some modules that we already have many transitive dependencies on certain modules that were Java 11 minimum, and there's more and more that are like now Java 17 minimum.
Yeah, Makito, which I've been spending a lot of time with lately, just moved to Java 11 as their minimum.
Yeah.
And I think there was a release candidate, no, not a release candidate, milestone version of Micronaut just released that it's a milestone of 4, right?
Yes, it's not like fully released. That's more like an internal release. We're still in the process of actually making it usable. But it will be in the next few weeks. It's been a long journey. But yes, there is a milestone out there, and it is built with JDK 17. So you will need a Java 17 distribution to use that.
When roughly do you hope for Micronaut 4 to be fully viable? I mean, fully released? I know that nothing committal. I just wondered it roughly. When do you expect?
Q2. So the second quarter of this year, it will be. Once we have the biggest challenge is getting the first milestone, and then we can iterate and do more regular milestones. So
since Q2 starts in 2 days,
Yeah. It's but the first milestone will be released soon, and then it will be iterative releases of the framework, and it's feature complete. So we're doing some performance optimizations still, but the feature set is done. So there's the actual work on new features is finished. And all the breaking changes that we planned are done. So
I did see a link saying that Micronaut 4 would actually use Groovy 4 as well.
That's right. So it's Groovy 4, Kotlin 1.8, and then we have some nice new features, like we have support for Kotlin symbol processing, KSP, which will make a lot of Kotlin users happy.
Yeah, people have been wanting that for a long time.
Yeah, and makes Kotlin compilation a lot faster. We have a new API for defining filters that doesn't require you to use reactive. With the imminent upcoming release of Loom, that just went out with Java 20. In fact, we have support for virtual threads in the framework.
That's the next question I had, actually, because from what it looks like, Oracle's planning to release virtual threads as an official part of 21. I don't know if that's... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we'll be ready for virtual threads. Micronaut 4 will be ready for virtual threads, and also we're generally preparing the framework for a post-reactive world. So a lot of the APIs we've been looking at have been, basically removing the need or the requirement to use reactive. So
isn't that interesting? I mean, I remember when I was in the Android world, the Android world has gone entirely Kotlin. I mean, even though they have Java stuff involved, the vast majority of apps now are Kotlin based. And I remember that, of course, they care about getting off the UI thread. So whenever they're doing any processing that isn't UI related, And that meant they've cared about these multi-threaded things for years. When they adopted Kotlin and Kotlin brought in coroutines, RX Android reactive stuff seemed to vanish almost overnight. I mean, within a couple of months, nobody was doing that anymore. And when Spring adopted Kotlin, when Spring says, yeah, you can make your application in Kotlin and use coroutines, I was wondering if a similar thing was going to happen in the Java world. But people, switching from Java to one of these alternative languages is a big leap. I was wondering if Micronaut, which of course does everything, was going to minimize reactive stuff when it adopted the virtual threads and coroutines, etc.
So we will continue to support reactive because there's some use cases that where you really want to use it, but we do want to make it easier for developers to use traditional imperative programming models for writing their applications. So and of course with the virtual threads as well. I don't think it solves all the cases of reactive, but it does solve many of them. So so we want to have strong support for Loom and virtual threads, and we will do, and that's shipping.
In the Kotlin world, the coroutines was step one and structured concurrency was step two. They needed that to coordinate the threads and cancellation and exception handling and all of that. And even though it looks like virtual threads will be part of 21, I don't think structured concurrency is anywhere near that point. So any opinion about whether it's going to be useful? I mean, the virtual threads are going to be helpful without something like structured concurrency, or are you just going to do it in a different way?
I think they will already be useful because, for example, certain things like the JDK's HTTP client and the Oracle JDBC driver have already been made virtual thread aware. So removing of synchronization blocks and so forth. So that means that you can scale out virtual threads even with blocking imperative code. A lot easier, which is good news. I think that there's definitely the case. I see it a lot that your regular developers find reactive programming much more challenging than traditional imperative programming.
That keeps me in business.
Yeah, it needs you need a different mindset. So yeah, Micronaut has always supported imperative programming styles, but there were a few APIs that were where you did have to know a little bit of reactive programming. So we want to make sure that none of those exist.
That's something to look forward to.
Yeah, and yeah. Lots of little improvements in the framework. We have a new compilation time expression language as well for annotations, which will be nice. And yeah, should be shipping soon, hopefully.
Okay, well, we didn't really talk about a lot of the things in the show notes, so let me just summarize some of that because I know you've got some limitations on your time, and I do appreciate you being here, both of you actually. Pardon me. Just want to emphasize that Paul King has been doing extraordinary work making blog posts related to small, interesting problems in the Groovy world. I listed about, 10 or so that were just this year alone. I mean, just in 2023, although I did include his year in review from the end of last year, but he's been going back months, cranking out blog posts. So people who are interested in seeing Groovy used to solve interesting, if small, self-contained practical problems, be sure to check out the Apache Groovy blog, which he's been just filling with posts on a regular basis. I always have a lot of fun with those, and they're not long. I mean, they're really just, and he's such a great coder. It's so much fun to watch. Of course, the one that I didn't include is one we did last year, which was really hot, was about incorporating some of the AI tools into Groovy as well, or using Groovy to access the AI tools. I imagine that'll be coming as well. The The other thing I want to mention, Guillaume Laforge, who used to head the Groovy language, is now seems to have picked up his blog as well and is revitalizing that. And he's even though he's still a Google person and talking more about cloud related things, he looked at open location code. He looked at visualizing output in the Groovy console. It's always good to see him become a bit more active in the Groovy space, even though he's developed this beard now that makes him look like this professor somewhere, this madman.
Yeah.
I see that Spock is still making progress, and our good friend Mr. Hockey, Hubert Klein.
Spock is amazing, and we continue using it for all of our testing. So.
Yeah, and I mean that's still active and effective. I don't necessarily consider Gradle part of the Groovy ecosystem anymore, really. I mean, we do have a DSL there, but even they keep pushing the Kotlin one. But okay, they're still active and growing, and things are happening there. So I guess this is all a long way of apologizing for how long it's been since we've had a Groovy podcast, and say please don't let that imply that there's not a lot going on in the community.
Groovy is still fully supported by Micronaut and will be in Micronaut 4.
Right.
So...
The reason we talked about Micronaut and Grails is we had you here. If we get a chance to talk to Paul King anytime soon, we'll spend the whole time talking about Groovy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe we can get that set up for a one coming soon.
I would love to. I always enjoy talking to Paul, Oh,
absolutely. And I do know that the plan is with some of the upcoming we're getting ready to do a release of Grail 6, but I know with Grail 7, the plan is for that to include Groovy 4.
Okay. So there are plans stretching out into the future for Grails as well. The publicity for Grails doesn't seem to be getting through in a lot of the community. I run into lots of developers who are not aware that Grails is still an active, growing project, which is kind of frustrating. I'll take part of the blame for that. I mean, the fact we haven't been pushing it on the podcast, we haven't been having a lot of podcasts recently, but still, we got to do something to get people to realize that this is a lot of what Spring Boot is doing is bringing in things that Grails has had for years, that Groovy's had for years. And of course, Grails used to be based on Spring, but it learned all this stuff from Micronaut and now has Micronaut engine driving a lot of what Grails does, and to everybody's benefit again. So yeah. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, we actually with the release of Grail 6, and you'll see this shortly, hopefully later today when GitHub Actions gets over its incident and the blog post goes through, but yeah, so there is a new implementation of the Grail CLI, and that was heavily inspired by the CLI used in Micronaut. So, definitely taking parts from other open source technologies in order to grow and make them better. And I think it's good to see that sort of thing. So yeah. And also with 6, I know you guys were just talking about the changes with Java baseline. So with Grail 6 is going to come a baseline of 11, and then the plan for 7 is to have a baseline of 17. Okay.
So that answered that earlier question, which I kept meaning to bring up again, and I forgot. So I appreciate you completing that story. That was very helpful. Thank you. But again, I don't want to run too late here. Let me just give Graeme, is there anything that you want to add to the shameless self-promotions? Is there anything that you're doing or that you're going to, anywhere you're speaking or presenting or books you're working on or anything you want to mention coming up?
Well, I'll be speaking at nothing in the short term, but go to Amsterdam. I'll be in Amsterdam in July, end of June, I think. So check that out. And no, right now, mainly just hard work on trying to get a Micronaut 4 release out, and then we'll do a lot of publicity in Q3 and beyond.
Jen, you mentioned the Grails and the foundation stuff. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up?
I mean, just the framework is, you know, we've, like I said before, we've got, you know, plans for 7. So, we are looking forward to, you know, the future, and, you know, we're hopeful to see, you know, what all is going to come, but we do have plans to continue, and Puneet's done, a great job of leading that effort. And we have a lot of clients that come to us daily, for support with their Grails applications, and it's great to see them interested in upgrading. So we are, you know, just as much working on Grails. We do have a larger team, you know, of course, with Micronaut, and our engineering partner with Oracle, but both technologies we're really excited about seeing, where they go.
Well, wonderful. I guess I'll mention a couple of things. My most recent book is the Mockito Made Clear, about the Mockito testing framework for mock stubs and spies. That's from Pragmatic Programmers. I have a weekly newsletter called Tales from the Jar Side that comes out every Sunday. And on every Monday, I have a video version of it. It's basically the use cases. If you don't feel like reading my newsletter, that's fine. I'll read it to you. And I try to add additional technical videos to that each week as well. So that, just look for either of them. The links are in the newsletter. I think that's about it. Paul did announce that the ApacheCon conference looks to be being renamed something like Community Over Code, and it will be in Halifax, Nova Scotia in October. But that's all I've heard about it. I did put a link to the page in the show notes. I think that's pretty much everything. Anything else either of you wanted to say?
Thanks for having us, and we look forward to our next
Thank you.
next time.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to everyone who's listening. And we will talk to all of you again soon, hopefully. But soon is a very flexible term here.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.